technical difficulties.
No, it's so many platforms. I haven't used this one, so now I have this one too. So thank you.
Yeah, add that to your repertoire. Yeah. Well, I think we have a good number here.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Sounds good. Shruti, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Shruti. I am currently a senior at UT Dallas. I am the treasurer of the UTD chapter of the American Medical Student Association, and we're essentially a pre-med organization that provides opportunities to pre-med students, such as volunteering. We have guest speakers at our meetings, share their experiences in the medical field, and we frequently like to talk about the medical, things that are happening in the medical field, so news, and we like discussing ethical questions that tend to come up in interviews. So if you're interested in joining our club, I'm going to go ahead and type in a link to our website, which you can go ahead and check out.
Good. You got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. We've already talked, but this event with you is co-hosted by both AMSA and Foster Connect. For those of you who are new and or coming from AMSA and don't know what exactly Foster Connect is, we're essentially an undergraduate student organization dedicated to supporting the North Texas child welfare community, whether that's through volunteering, mentorship, or fundraising. And we're really excited to just have this forum to bring in professionals who have experience working with those stakeholders who are involved in the child welfare system, like Dr. Partap herself. She was, even if she doesn't really know it, she was a really critical part of getting this club started, and we're so excited to have her here today. So yeah, Shruti, do you want to go off, starting with the first few questions?
Absolutely. Dr.
Yeah, good. Sorry.
Could you tell us a bit about your journey and how you got into medicine, and from there how you got involved in advocacy?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm just so impressed with you guys. I mean, I don't think I was this smart or driven or intuitive about being creative. So I just hats off to you guys. And I know there's other folks on the call. And is it okay if we do an introduction real quick of everyone? I'd love to hear. Like I know you guys introduced yourselves, but I'd love to hear. Why are you on this call today? Where do you picture your own path in terms of advocacy or healthcare or something else? And then I can sort of answer kind of in that lens, if that's okay, if we can do that. So I don't know if you guys want to call on people or what your screen looks like. So I'll turn that over to you all to kind of facilitate moving us through.
Yeah, sounds good. I can just go off of my screen. So Lane, you're right next to me if you want to go.
All right. Hi, my name is Lane Hughes. I'm a sophomore biology major here at UT Dallas. I'm the secretary of the American Medical Student Association, the UT Dallas chapter. And I'm here because I thought this was going to be an interesting event. But on a more personal note, I'm actually looking into going into sort of primary care. So I don't know if I'm going to do like family medicine or pediatrics or OB-GYN, but I'm looking in that direction. So I thought this would be an interesting discussion.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Shiva, you're next.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, guys. My name is Shiva, and I'm a senior studying biology, and hopefully I'll be in medical school next year. But like Lane, I'm also interested in doing primary care, and I'm also part of the Foster Connect Executive Board. And I'm mainly interested in learning about the intersection of healthcare and the foster care system, and so that's why I'm here.
Awesome.
Aviru? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. I'm a sophomore. I'm interested in going into medicine, but afterwards I'd also like to go into public policy, which is why I'm particularly interested in these discussions.
Okay, great.
Sahana?
Hi, I'm Sahana. I'm also on the board for Foster Connect. So I love to come into these meetings and listen because I'm on the board, but also like as a pre-med student, I love to hear the insight, and how you got involved in the foster care system while you were doing medicine as well. I find that really interesting.
Awesome.
Armand?
Yeah, so I'm a sophomore biology major, and I also want to hopefully go to medical school. And I'm not exactly sure what I want to do, but it's along the lines of like either pediatric surgery or other things, just like involving like family medicine as well, because I like like how personal it is, kind of, and how like you kind of like grow connections with people, but also like that's not like the only thing I want to do. And like I think it's very interesting that like you're able to do the foster care side of it as well, and like you've done the medicine side, which you like, but like you're also doing other things that you enjoy, and that's why I was like really interested in this.
Okay, great.
Shruti, do you want to go again? Or okay.
Yeah, I heard your titles, but I'd love to hear kind of like what you see your journey being. Next.
Absolutely. So I'm currently in the process of applying to medical school right now. I personally do not know what I want to get into after medicine, but advocacy is certainly something that I would like to pursue as part of being a physician.
Awesome. All right, Stefan, last but not least, did you tell me at the beginning? No, you didn't. You called on your colleagues, so you go.
Yeah, no, I didn't. So I'm very non-traditional. I'm actually a computer science and cognitive science double major. But really, what I'm really passionate about is bridging the gaps between communities. So whether that's college students and children in foster care, or thinking about the digital health divide, how can we make technology more accessible for patients? How can we make technology accessible for practicing physicians? And how does policy, more specifically health policy, help define some of those changes? So yeah, and then I think there are like a few more people on the call. If you want to,
sorry. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like you can't probably see them on the phone, but yeah. Sakshi, if you want to go next. I don't think she can hear me. Sneha.
Hey, yeah. So, hi, Dr. Partap. My name is Sneha, and I'm actually a part of both boards, Foster Connect and AMSA. So, kind of help make this event happen today in that kind of sense. But I think what's really interesting about what you do and why I'm really interested to hear you talk is kind of how you've been able to work more in advocacy and with foster children from a non-clinical aspect. And I think it's not the most traditional way, but that's what makes it more interesting. And I've never thought about, helping out as a physician, but not necessarily in a non-clinical path. And so I think it would be really nice to hear how you've been doing that.
Great.
Sarah?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm a junior majoring in biology. I'm just hoping to go into medical school, and I'm just here because I love hearing doctor stories of, like, especially how they picked, like, their specialty is always so much fun hearing, like, medical students who are doctors. It really, like, shows everyone's personality and, like, what they're interested in. And also, I genuinely have no clue what I want to do, so I just love hearing what everyone else does. So, yeah, that's why I'm here.
Awesome.
Harsha? And then, no worries. And then we have Jolie.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Because my internet is awful right now. Okay, cool. So yeah, my name's Jolene. I'm a sophomore. I'm also a pre-med student, but I feel like right now it's just really easy to forget why I want to be a doctor when I'm just taking a bunch of science courses. So I've been trying to come to things like this to just see the rewards of getting through medical school and getting through college, and yeah, just for inspiration, and maybe to get some questions answered. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. Is that everybody?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I really appreciate you guys sharing that with me. So I'm looking looking at your first question here, and it's how did you get into medicine, and from there, how did you get involved with advocacy? So I was born into medicine in terms of the fact that like my parents are both doctors. It's kind of like being born on a farm, right? Like that's what I saw, that's what I understood. When I was little, my mom was studying for her pathology boards, and so she'd have the slides projected to the screen with all the cells, and I would, run around in it. Like that's a weird thing to do, but that's like how I grew up. Like I go to her lab and I would see different tissues and jars and organs. I mean, so like, and I just kind of grew up around it. But by the time I was 5, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. Like it wasn't even, and I never wavered from that. But I knew I was going to be a doctor and a writer and an interior designer and something else totally random or and teacher. And it's weird because if you think about what you picture, whether it's in medicine or not right now, if you keep those focused and you say them out loud, it is so odd for me to look back and realize that I did weave all that in somehow. And you don't know what's going to happen or how, but if you don't keep it top of mind, if you're not brave about your interests, like don't let people talk you out of them, because you never know what opportunity is going to allow you to seek that, even if you have an MD or a public health degree or a public policy degree. Like the degree is a degree, but then how you make a difference in the world can look really different based on the opportunities that you naturally are drawn to or that people draw you to because you've talked about your interests, right? And so if you forget what your interests were, it's not going to happen. And so I would really encourage you guys to not let people talk you out of a longer list of interests you have that just don't sound like they have job security, right? Like that's the thing I would always hear in the back of my, family, right? Is like, but you can't make money that way, and that's not a career or whatever. Um, and I think they're as surprised as at what me or my siblings have done, but we kept it focused. And so I would say I probably kept secretly my list of passions and didn't let them go. I knew the one thing I would never be is a pediatrician. So in terms of picking your specialty, I was going to be first an orthopedic surgeon, then a heart surgeon, then a psychiatrist, and then in med school, HIV broke out, and I was going to be an HIV doctor. And then I did one rotation of peds, which was like, I wanted nothing to do with it. You have no idea how much I hated pediatrics. And I was totally sold, like in 30 days, that this is what I want to be for the rest of my life. And I say that because a lot of people do know exactly what they want to be, but if you don't, good, because you just never know what mentor or patient or experience is going to just take you down a different path. And if you're not open to it, it's not going to happen, right? And so I think being able to talk about those things out loud with people really helps too, because if you surround yourself with people who are not like you, it's really hard to feel validated in the things that you like to do. And so as much as you can, surround yourself with people who are who get you, right? Even if they don't want to do what you want to do, that they kind of get it and they can recognize it and they can stay out of the way with it. Or even better, support you, in it, but at least not be in your way if they don't agree with it. And I say all that because I think about friends too that have had to do some of that. In terms of getting involved with advocacy, well, let me back up. So I went to a 6-year program. So I knew at 18 I was going to go straight into med school. And it was at University of Missouri, Kansas City, 6-year program. Really intense program, designed differently from other 6-year programs. And I have no regrets about doing that. But I can also tell you that like 10% of my friends were gone by the first year. And some people had a really hard time. And I say that now because as you go into medicine, even if you're sure today, it's okay if it turns out to be a little bit different, or if it really stinks the first year, That's okay. Doesn't mean the second year will. And if you don't know today, that's fine too, because you don't have to be a doctor to make a really big difference in medicine. You really don't. Um, Advocacy is more about your heart than it is anything else. And so, if you know, even back in high school or middle school or whatever, you were looking for ways to connect with people and give, then that just means you're an advocate at heart. And so you will naturally find career paths that allow you to be an advocate. When I was in residency, actually after I was in residency, we started a curriculum to help physicians be comfortable with advocacy or learn how to do advocacy. And the biggest surprise was everyone could name something they were already doing, but they hadn't labeled it as advocacy. They were either sports coaches, they were mentoring, they were Girl Scout or Boy Scout leaders, and all of that is advocacy too. For me, I got lucky in that I knew in med school that I was very interested in public health. Well, I say med school, so by the time I was 20, I knew that I wanted a public health degree. And it was for the goofiest reason. It was because every time I read an article and I really liked it, it was written by an MD, M.P.H, and I was like, oh, they're like super smart. And so I had this artificial belief that an M.P.H made you a better doctor, but what it really was I was drawn to public health research, right? That's why I was like enjoying those articles more. And so when you want, like in my case, I wanted a public health degree, that was going to automatically lend itself to what looks like advocacy, right? Because I was more interested in not only practicing medicine, but in the practice of medicine, I would notice, even in med school, repeat problems that we were not tackling. And I was interested in going upstream and either redesigning healthcare, redesigning public health, but certainly not just diagnosing everybody with high blood pressure, prescribing them, and sending them out the door to see them back a week later. Like, that just made no sense to me. I'm glad that makes sense to people. We need full-time practitioners. But I knew really early that that was not going to be me. And so, by way of example, very openly, so I'm 50. My parents were appalled that I wanted to get a public health degree. I mean, appalled, right? First, I wanted to get an anthropology degree, and for those of you who are Indian, maybe you can picture this. They were like, there's no way we're paying for you to get a minor in anthropology. Like, hell no, right? And so I had to kind of table that, but I did have a really great family who totally thought it was great to get an M.P.H, and that allowed me to pick a place for residency and then do a fellowship that was a HRSA fellowship, Health Resources Service Administration. I did a fellowship for 2 years to learn how to do research, public health, and advocacy. And so that happened when I was 29, but I made that, I knew in my heart by the age of 20, right? I didn't know I was going to do it in Phoenix. I didn't know what it was going to look like. But if you stay, be okay with the fact that you like something that's super different, and then you won't forget to pursue it. It's kind of like it'll just guide you. I have to plug in my phone. Hang on. Let me do this real quick. Okay, so I know that's only the first question, but that is how that answer had to go. So sorry, that was long. Any questions about that, or did I not answer the question, which is fine too?
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay. So could you tell us a little bit more about your clinical experiences as a pediatrician?
Yeah, sure. So, and I have to tell you, I've had a little bit different path, but it's not because I'm smart. It's because, kind of like I said, I just stayed focused on what I wanted to do. And so I went to residency in Phoenix where everybody was, 90% of the patients were not only Hispanic, but Spanish speaking. And I speak no Spanish, and I actually made a decision not to learn it because I would look around and I would see my colleagues or attendings get by with 3 words of Spanish, and I was like, I need to be conversational. I can't pretend to learn Spanish, and so I stayed in Phoenix for 12 years and continued to work with families who were mostly either immigrants or Spanish speaking. But when I did my fellowship in research, I asked to work on the Native American reservation. That had not been done before through our hospital. But I was like, if I don't do it now, it's not going to happen later. So for my fellowship, we actually arranged for the first time a rotation for me to do for 2 years and work on with Pima Indians on the Gila Indian Reservation in Arizona. And so I got to then contrast what it was like for Native Americans to immigrants coming from mostly Mexico at that time. And that fed my sort of public health, but I also got to do school-based clinics. So I was working in a federally qualified underserved clinic, a school-based clinic, where I was the attending over, and these were kids who were uninsured for the most part, who would actually have a full clinic in the school nurse's office twice a week. And then I ended up starting a clinic for uninsured children who didn't have a place to go, but there was a faith-based St. Vincent de Paul had an adult clinic, and they agreed to launch a pediatric clinic. And so we did that, and what was cool about that is, financially, institutions have a hard time underwriting free medical care when people are uninsured. And this is a long time ago, so, and it bothered physicians who were at the hospital-based settings that they couldn't see those kids. I mean, they could, but it was a big deal, so they kind of couldn't. But by setting up this clinic for uninsured children, it allowed everyone to volunteer their time. So we had cardiology, renal, primary care. I had like 8 specialties by the time I moved to Texas. So I think I also worked in a newborn nursery that was like 10% positive for drugs. Now, I say all that, but I only got to do any of that because I chose a county-based medical center in Phoenix Children's Hospital, and they encouraged, allowed, and cleared the pathway for me to pursue those things. But they only could do that because I said what I wanted to do, right? And I had to be creative about it as well. It's like, why would this benefit me as a clinician, me as a clinical educator? Why is it just the right thing to do? So you have to sort of, those aren't unfair questions for people to ask you. Like, we're not entitled to do what we love, but you have to figure out, like, be prepared that you have to take it seriously from a business case when you're there. But that can't be a reason not to do it, right? Like, if you're serious about it, you'll figure it out. So I think the other clinical experience then, I love teaching, and I did that in Arizona. Foster care, you guys brought this up, and so I feel like I'm going to burst your bubble, but here's the thing with foster care is I knew nothing about foster care when I got this job to do foster care and I'm not in that now, but so for 8 years I was the medical director for foster care. But what happened is, and this is again like your path, we moved to Texas because my husband got recruited for a job here. He's a lawyer. And so we had to move here. I knew nobody. I had no job leads, and I had a 6-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. So if you want to start a family, that also factors into your kind of planning and stuff like that. And I was so lonely because I'm like sitting here in a city I don't know with 2 young children who like don't talk, right? And so I literally called Children's Medical Center, and I'm like, hey, I'm a pediatrician and I don't know anybody. Is there a way I can meet some pediatricians? And I noticed somebody was giving grand rounds on child abuse. I'd already been very involved with child abuse, which I haven't really talked about yet, but I ended up getting transferred to one person and then transferred to another person. And by the 3rd transfer, I ended up with a job interview for this foster care position. I mean, that is literally how it wasn't posted. They weren't really looking. But the woman on the set who was a secretary said, well, what are your interests? And again, because I knew what they were, I said, well, I just spent, however many years focused on family violence and developing programs for children who have health disparities. And I wanted to design a trauma program. And because I could answer her question, that's how I ended up with this job. And so when I took the job, I mean, so what's crazy is when I interviewed, I had to read up on foster care. I knew nothing about foster care. I knew how to spell it. Literally, that was all I knew. I'd never seen a child in foster care. Or if I had, I was not aware that I had, and I'd already been a pediatrician by then for like 8 years. And I showed up and I'm like, hey, I'm the first full-time foster care pediatrician. My job was split 50% research, 50% clinical, because again, I knew what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to focus on trauma treatment models. And I thought I'll go to clinic a couple days a week and then I'll just geek out and do my research. And it turned out to not be that way at all. Foster care was an all-consuming, amazing population of need. And so what ended up happening was, believe it or not, at that time there was no full-time foster care pediatrician in the state of Texas. So we had people seeing kids in foster care, 1 or 2 days a week or as part of their job or whatever, but there was not a full-time. There's one other doctor in Houston who's done a ton and predates me, but I think she would also say she wasn't like a full-time foster. So that's kind of my clinical experiences. I think whatever I did, in whatever clinic I worked in, I will say that because my focus, I skipped this part, but I had a focus on family violence, which is why I did the fellowship. And that happened because I went to a random talk, kind of like you guys are doing. I went and heard a speaker who was a domestic violence survivor in college because I knew nothing about domestic violence. And I was so shocked. I began screening patients. And that was when I was like 20 or 21. Then when I became a pediatrician, I carried that interest with me, that what happens to you affects all of your health and well-being. And it's not the medication we prescribe that's going to make you better. It's these underpinnings of your health, or your life experience. So, but I knew no matter where I was working that my focus was on abuse, neglect, high-risk factors that were affecting children's health. And so I think that gave me some commonality no matter where I was working. Right? Because sometimes you don't pick where you work, but you can pick how you do that job. So I think that's what I was doing too. Yeah. Sorry, again, too long of an answer, but that's how that all happened. So, and I'll talk more about foster care and one of the other questions. But anyhow.
This is kind of related to what you were just talking about. How would you advise students to sort of find that commonality when they don't exactly know what they want to do, but they have multiple interests?
Yeah, what I would say now at this stage is don't overthink it. Like, let your heart and head say what your interests are and just see where it goes. I think what will happen is you will naturally, things will rise up, fall back down. You'll be sure this is my life thing, and then you'll hate it a year later, and that's okay too. You guys are at that point in your lives where you should do that. And I think I couldn't even have told you that this common thread existed until probably a year ago. It happens so intuitively, but I guess looking back, I would say I knew in residency I was going to keep that family violence focus, because what happens is when you're seeing patients or you're studying something, you automatically gravitate towards certain topics. You notice you read on them more, you look for them more, and you'll naturally keep doing that. But if you artificially try to fit a mold, you're just going to be unhappy. I truly think that. I mean, I think the doctors out there who are, or any profession, they're making good money, on paper everything's great, but if you ask them how happy they are, you know what I mean? And so if that's not a driver for you, great, don't worry about it. But if you like some satisfaction in your life, then I would say
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about what you do as the Health Equity Director at Cook Children's?
Yeah, so this is another position. This job did not exist, kind of like the one I had at UT. So I don't know that this is the norm. So this has certainly happened for me. So when I was at UT Southwestern, I became really focused on making sure we had high quality care for children in foster care. But I knew that what I had started with was trying to develop upstream interventions so we don't need to do this because it's such a disaster by the time these kids are removed. And so when I knew that I wasn't going to be able to move upstream at UT Southwestern and Children's, that's totally fair for them. But I knew that I needed to move upstream in prevention. So I called my friends around town, and I ended up at Cook Children's because I knew they had a Center for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. And I loved that they had that and asked if I could be considered. And they weren't looking. Their previous medical director had left. And all of a sudden, like, I'm in this interview again, and I had this job to be head of this prevention center. And it was crazy. But it was the first non-clinical job I took. And they said I could start clinic, and they still, have kept that. But what I ended up doing was for 2 years, I've been entirely community-facing. So non-clinical, meeting families and elected officials and leaders to identify the gaps in care for why children end up in foster care, end up not doing well, abused or neglected, or their parents are struggling, or like, what is the problem in this, economy that we can't take better care of our kids, right? And after doing that for a couple years, everything that happened with COVID and with the heightened awareness around race, I think led Cook Children's to decide, we do a lot of good work, but we need a more focused something around equity. And so they just created this position for medical director of health equity and asked me if I wanted to have this job, and it's a brand new position again. And so I've only been in this job 8 weeks, and still hope to start clinic back up again soon, a half day a week. But this new job is I get to work so Cook Children's has about over 1 million children a year that they serve, and my job is to work with other leaders and make sure that when you come to Cook Children's, we are supporting an equitable health experience and outcomes for all children, regardless of income, race, ethnicity, language, identity, whatever we know are the social constructs that change the way people receive or fare, right, with their health. It's a huge opportunity, and it's not just about what happens in our four walls, but then how do we communicate that back out? Since so much of health drivers are, again, public health or public policy. But I got totally lucky. We had a retreat today, and someone said, "What's your dream job?" And I'm like, I'm in it. I don't know what to say. And this is the thing about not overthinking things. If I had no idea this would happen, but I stayed true to what I wanted to do, right? I love what we have built at Children's. We have the Center for Foster Care Excellence. It's still probably serving the most kids in the state in any one location. It's an integrated model of care. They just released a policy statement for how to take great care of kids during COVID and what the policy gaps are. And Cook Children's has a great foster care clinic as well. But for me personally, I knew once I'd built that center out, I wasn't serving kids if I wasn't doing what I could do. And that was hard to leave that center and go to a different hospital to do prevention. But if I hadn't, I wouldn't be here, right, doing this equity work, which is kind of like the it's like a culmination of everything else I've done. So I'm only poised to do this job because for 25 years I've been focused on health disparities and public health, right? So I can't tell you what all it's going to involve, except that I'll be tackling equity and disparities on behalf of a big team of people at Cook Children's. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I'm going to transition a little bit into discussing more about sort of foster care or children in foster care specifically. So I just want to ask you, what are some of the challenges that are impacting access to health care for children who are involved in child welfare system?
Yeah, so and I have a much better understanding of it after leaving the exam room for the last 2 years. And so, without exaggeration, and this is just me, Anu Partap, not me, Cook Children's or anything else. Our kids in care, and in my opinion, are the most vulnerable, overlooked, underserved, mistreated group of children in our state. And it's not because people don't care. It's not because they're not investing money or time or talent in it. It's because we just can't seem to get it right. And when I first joined foster care clinic, I felt like I was walking around in a twilight zone or like a war zone. I could not believe how sick these children were, and I could not believe that it wasn't considered a state disaster. I really that's how, because before I did foster care clinic, I've been working with parents who had their own children with them all the time and were invested and connected and all those good things. And then I'm suddenly in this clinic where nobody's related to each other, and the kids don't know what to call the parents in the room, and they all had conditions that were hard to treat. And I think the problem with foster care is that foster care is a legal status. It's not anything else. There's no condition. There's no medical condition called foster care. I mean, we code for it, of course, but that's not a diagnosis that needs to be treated. It's a legal status, right? And we forget that. And so what happens is you come into foster care, you sort of label this child in foster care or a teen in foster care, and we forget to say, actually, you're this really strong kid who survived a lot before you entered care, and now you're surviving a lot of uncertainty while you're in a legal process, and all the while you have emotional, physical, developmental, and educational hardships that most of your friends and peers don't deal with. It's such a, and they're all defined as children with special health care needs. I mean, by definition, if you're in foster care, you are designated a child with special health care needs. But we don't really then treat it like we do kids with cancer, right? And I think that was the impetus behind designing the clinical model at UT was we should be treating children who experience any trauma, whether you're in foster care or not, the same intentionality if you have leukemia, if you have a spinal cord injury, a brain injury. We take those very seriously. Yet foster care and child abuse and neglect are far more common, and we treat it like a social problem, right? But it's not. There's enough scientific evidence to say living with abuse, neglect, stressful household environments can impair your physiological response to stress in ways that triggers chronic disease. Like, we know this through science, right? And so I think with foster care, the beauty of foster care is you have these amazing children and teens and young adults who've tolerated a lot from a lot of people and deserve a lot from everybody. You've got great foster parents and family attorneys, child welfare workers. I really have high regard for everyone involved. It's just going to take all of us to constantly demand better and say we're not there yet. Like, no child should die while in foster care because they weren't taken care of That's ridiculous, right? That should never happen. And so I think if, as long as we begin, and you guys are the ones that will change this idea that social ills, if you will, poverty, mental illness, domestic violence, family violence, all these things, if these are actually medical risk factors like smoking or drinking lead-based water or whatever, that we need to treat them like that, we can completely turn medicine on its head, which we're trying now, but we're not going to get it done in the next, it's going to take the next 10, 20 years to do it. So I'm still very attached to the whole foster care world, but I get to look at it a little bit bigger. Like, how did we even get to this point where you're in foster care? And how do we narrow that margin? So,
yeah, definitely. And then sort of going off to that, this will probably be the last question that I'll ask you, and then we can open up the floor for questions. Thinking about the short term, how can college students or like other stakeholders sort of get involved or solve or maybe even like eliminate some of these challenges or is it something that we should maybe think about as pre-med students going into healthcare?
Yeah, you guys already have your hearts all in the right place. And so the real thing is, right, there's like 1,000 opportunities. Which one do you pick? And I would say, there's no wrong way to contribute, but it should fit what you feel great about, because the people that you work with or that you're helping can sense if you're doing it because you feel like you have to or because you want to be there. I think the top priorities I see, but by no means does it exclude anything that you all know of. I think there's a big gap in educational mentorship for young adults coming out of foster care. It's hard no matter what, right? And this idea that at 18, if you're not adopted, you don't have an adult or peers that are necessarily helping you navigate that. And even if no one helps you navigate it, just to not feel alone is a really big deal, right? Like sometimes you guys just want to talk to each other and vent. You don't need them to show you where your classroom is. You just need someone to know that what you're experiencing is normal and scary, and so you can go about your day, right? And I'm not even sure kids who've been in care necessarily have that support. I think for kids who are younger, one thing that I did for every child I met in foster care is I would actually tell them at the first appointment, do you know that there are thousands of people working hard to make sure that you're going to be okay? And they would be shocked. I mean, they just have no idea that they're not the only kid in care, that anyone cares about what's happening to them. And so any effort that makes kids in foster care feel connected, seen, heard, remembered is a big deal, because they're required to stay confidential, which kind of makes them a little bit hidden, right, from sight. You don't get to hear from kids or see them. They're not on TV because they're not allowed to. Their parents aren't talking about them because they're not allowed to because of court. And so any gesture or anything that makes them feel connected is huge.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful responses to our questions. I guess we can now open up the floor for the last 15 minutes. If anybody else wants to ask Dr. Partap questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute and ask.
Hey, Dr. Partap, I had one question. So, from your experiences, like from a health equity director point of view, is there any like special experience or encounter that has kind of been memorable or engraved in your mind?
Yeah, not to be all sentimental, but I mean, I could still cry today over the patients I took care of. And I will tell you that I did not cry during patient care, or even if kids died. I'll be very open with you guys. If a baby died, a child died, my patient, somebody else's patient, I never cried because we did what we could. And you sort of detach, like you have to stay real objective, right, to get through. When I got to foster care clinic, I cried every freaking week, like it was crazy, and because I didn't have that sense of gratification that we were doing everything we could for these kiddos. And so there are kids who had medical complications because we didn't take good care of how they moved through our system. And I remember those stories, so when your patient seizes or is hospitalized or can't breathe or almost dies, and it's only because they got moved out of this home and got sent to another home and their medication didn't go with them. That's heartbreaking, right? When you meet a kid who's so sweet and such a good kid but had a bad flashback of an abuse scenario, and in that flashback hurt the foster family's pet, and now the foster family doesn't want to risk that child staying there, so these children, they might get moved. That's heartbreaking. Right. They didn't control the flashback. So yeah, those stories, all of them, honestly, I still am in touch with foster parents, former foster parents who've adopted. But I will add that it's not just the foster care stories. It's also the families I've met in the last 2 years in the community who are living in poverty and barely making it through the day. Their stories are equally ingrained in my head for, like, how did we get here, even, in the middle of DFW. So, yeah, it drives all of my work. And I'm glad because it is the family stories. And that's the thing about on the physician side, I had the luxury of clinical care. And when I start back up, those for me are a driver. Not everybody is built that way, though. Some people don't need that and they're just as driven. But for me personally, I need that, that connection.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, yeah.
Hi, I had a question. So, with your work in foster care, how do you think that's affected your relations with well children?
So, that's a great question. I took care of what I was calling intact families before because I didn't know how to differ. So I had my non-foster years and my foster years. And I didn't treat the children of families differently in foster care than I did in my non-foster years. So I sort of approached it that you are a family raising a child, and these are the needs that they have, but what was different is their legal situation and the fact that you could move at any point. But because the foundation is of being supportive and open and unbiased and holistic and comprehensive and really like up to date on the most advanced medical care that these kids can get, it doesn't matter who you see them. Right? So if I were to see kids tomorrow who are all well children, I'm still going to be thinking about, well, what is this family not telling me that's a risk factor or a stress for them? During COVID, there's tons of unemployment. We may not guess who that is, right? Or people are behind on their rent, or they don't have as much money for food. And they're not going to walk in looking that way. They're going to get dressed up, put their makeup on, and show up, right? But understanding that there's no shame in those, I think, I have a much better idea that there can be no shame with hardship, and everyone has to be approached as if they may be experiencing hardship and making that safe to be open about. So I think that's probably what's changed. The other thing that's changed is my physical exam changed. We miss a lot of physical signs of abuse in regular clinic and non-foster clinic and foster care. Kids entered foster care maybe for neglect, but they'd be covered in scars that we had missed for years in other clinical settings. And so I think my exam definitely changed because of foster care clinics. So during well visits, and I educate other pediatricians on that too, is we don't do a good exam. We need to do a much better skin exam to look for scars of abuse. Yeah.
I had another question. So kind of going off, I know that foster clinic was like definitely like a big sort of like very emotionally stressful for you. How did you sort of cope cope with those feelings, or how did you sort of get past those moments?
I don't know that I did. I'll be really honest. One of as the one who, so to give you some context, when I got to children's, we had 2 exam rooms, and we only had 2 of us that saw patients on any given day. When I left, we had 2 campuses and 40 people, and I forget how many exam rooms. So it was just a huge program when I left. But my biggest concern was actually burnout of people doing full-time foster care, and how do we support secondary trauma and things like that. And so for me, it was a lot of being able to decompress at home with my family. But I'm not one that can sort of separate, so I can tell you that I had to realize that it might be taking a toll, but I did not until I left. I had no idea until I was no longer going to clinic. It took me almost 60, 90 days to sort of like come back to probably a normal level of stress. And so I do think we need to make sure people have a mix of clinical experiences so they don't experience burnout. It's a common thing in the child abuse world and foster care world to experience some of that. People meditate, they do yoga, talking to peers. That's all fine, but that's like just putting a Band-Aid on the fact that you're going to go back the next day and see a lot of badness again. And so I think, I will say today's physicians are much more attuned with boundaries than people my age who are in their, I think the people who are like in their late 20s and 30s are much more balanced. And so hopefully you'll have better role models than I did, or that I was. So, yeah. But it was hard. I won't lie. It's really hard.
Dr. Partap, you mentioned that you did your residency in Phoenix. What made you choose to go there?
Yeah, so for me, family's always been first, and so my husband is not in medicine. He'd been a Marine in Yuma before I met him, and he loved Arizona and really wanted us to live there. And so I went and did a 1-month rotation, never been there before, and loved it. And it was really community minded, and there weren't fellows at the pediatric program I chose, which meant I would be more directly hands on than just letting somebody else do the care. But it was very much a family decision to move to Phoenix. And I would not be where I am now if I hadn't. So that's what I mean about you just have to sort of, not to be goofy, but like it's that whole thing about letting your spirit guide you, sort of. If I'd overthought it, it'd be like, well, it's not a whatever program. It's not a, but I didn't. I knew for me, family was first, and it served me really well. So, yeah, that's why. And I knew I wanted a county program, and it was a county program. But I did research and make sure that it was not going to limit where I would end up. And I did a 1-month rotation, and the teaching was astonishing, and the patient population was really exciting for me. So I did check it out before I committed to going there. I moved there for a whole month and did that kind of thing. But yeah.
Okay, cool.
Do you have any particular book recommendations that maybe go in depth into the problems with the foster care system?
That's a great question. Let me email that to, because there's testimonial books that actors have written that describe their time in foster care. I'm not sure those are ones I would recommend, though. Like, I have a handful of those. But I am on we have the American Academy of Pediatrics, and we have a council on foster care, adoption, and kinship care, and I'm on the executive committee of that. And let me get 2 or 3 really good recommendations. There's a book called A Boy Called It, or something like that. It's older now, but some of these older books describe a system that is so god awful. I'm not sure I want you to read those. It's a little bit better now. So there is one called 3 Little Words I Heard the Speaker Speak let me get I'll get the titles to you, but I'm glad you asked. Foster care, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you guys have this group, because we need people to care about, understand, and spread the word that there's this whole population of kids that nobody talks about, and you guys are part of that, group now. So, or you have been for a while, so I appreciate that.
Any other questions?
I just had one quick one. I wanted to know how balancing married life and family life was with your career.
It's so funny the timing of today's call. So I told my 13-year-old yesterday, and I don't know why I told her, but I said something like, "You do know that my number one calling is being a physician." I don't know what I was thinking, but I told her, and she was like, "What? It's not being a mom?" And I was like, no, wait, let me backpedal here a little bit. And so we had to have this really big conversation about, but I'm going to tell you, it was not easy. I had to put some very black and white rules in place for me to remember that my number one role is to be a mom. And it was not easy because academia and professional growth does not encourage that necessarily. It's probably better now, but I waited. A lot of people are stronger than me and had kids in med school and residency. I knew that wasn't something I would succeed at, so we waited a long time as a result. So now I'm really old and I'm raising teenagers, but that's the downside. But I made the decision to be like, I'm not going to go to any faculty dinners at all. And it was really tough because I would miss out meeting nationally renowned people whose works I'd read. But I was like, it's more important I'm home, because in the early years, that's when their brain development matters more than my brain development or my patient's brain development. I had to be that concrete about it. The more and so you have to also have support from your partner and your family in setting those limits. And those are things to negotiate early, I would say, and not in the thick of raising a family. So as much as you can, talk about that and think about that. And find your mentors. I interviewed women I admired and asked them, what do you regret? What did you do well at? And I took those stories, and I remember going to part-time and thought, no one respects me now because I'm a part-time pediatrician. And that's how hardcore it used to be. But I still am where I am now, even though I made those decisions. I'm not saying maybe you all will be CEOs, and that's not something I'm ever going to be. You know what I mean? Of a health system or a public health system or president. I don't know what your aspirations are, but yeah, I think I feel good about that limit setting and that it didn't. I don't feel like I've been held back for having a fulfilling life.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And it's kind of like what I said earlier about being brave and comfortable with what you want, because people are going to try to talk you out of it all the time, and you just have to kind of stay strong. So. And you don't have to have kids either. I didn't mean to imply any of that. I think that was in your question, or else I made it up.
Yeah.
Well, it's 5 o'clock, but thank you all for coming today. It was so great talking to you, Dr. Partap. If any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Shruti for MSA-specific or FCE-specific questions. And I'll watch out for the book list from you if you want to email that to me. But otherwise, thank you all. Have a wonderful Friday.
Yeah, you guys are amazing, and feel free to share my email address. If you guys just want someone to bounce something off of or whatever. I think you have my cell phone number too. I'm fine with it. So just keep up the great work. Let me know how I can help you.
Thank you, Dr. Partap.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Keep it up.